Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym Podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2010. The topic is nutrition, and the title is Tips to Decrease Calories Comfortably. This is a contrast, but a follow-up to podcast number 2006, which was Tips to Increase Calories Comfortably. I got an email from someone, and they said they really enjoyed that one. And that just made me kind of think of, why not make the opposing podcast? That way people who need to decrease calories can learn how to do that, but in a more comfortable way than what people typically do. What prompted podcast 2006 is I'm working with a personal trainer who needs to eat more to grow. He's been super lean his entire life, has always struggled to eat more in a consistent way. So we were making ways or figuring out ways that he could increase calories in a more comfortable way so that we could be sustainable and he could actually get the growth he wants and keep it, not just grow some, fall behind, grow some, fall behind. Now, to grow, we need a caloric surplus. We need sufficient protein for growth, but we also need sufficient energy, carbs and fats, to fuel the growth. To lose body fat, we need a caloric deficit. But, as with growth, protein is still very important. Protein is important in fat loss and weight loss diets to ensure what's lost is most exclusively body fat as possible. We want it to be only body fat. We do not want to lose muscle. If we're in a caloric deficit and protein is too low, the body will catabolize, which means break down protein for energy. It'll also just fall behind on muscle and joint repair, and the system of our body kind of just falls apart. It kind of decays in health. Like a car, that if you drive it and only just fill the gas tank, but you don't pay attention to anything else, if you never take the car to a mechanic, you will get some mileage out of that car, but the car will start to fall apart. And it falls apart pretty early in the lifetime of the car. So let's go back to a human body. If you don't pay attention to your body, you don't take care of things, you don't eat, with proper protein, you start to feel beat up and kind of just not well in your 30s. I've had people come to me and tell me like, oh, you know how it is in your 30s, like your shoulder hurts, your elbow hurts. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you're 30, you're not even halfway through life, and you already have a body that's falling apart. Holy freaking crap. Sometimes it's due to just crap-like injuries, and, that's unfortunate. But if it's been poor nutrition support and they haven't really been paying attention to what the hell they're doing, I do feel bad for them. I can understand why it's happening. Just like if you buy a brand new car, it's super fancy, wonderful car, and you only just fill up the gas, you never take it to mechanics, you never really do anything to maintain it. Think about a beautiful home. You buy a brand new house, you don't do anything in maintenance. All of a sudden, the siding, starts to crack or crumble. Everything starts to look kind of dingy. Things aren't working 100%. They start to reduce. You notice, water pressure's a little low. You go through all these little signs of things falling apart and decaying. But if you don't address it when it's small, if you don't address it when the decay starts, it turns into big, catastrophic issues. And that's what happens with the human body. We want to maintain and take care of our body even if we're in a deficit. We're in a deficit to lose fat. We're not in a deficit to have our body fall apart. and that's what we want to be careful of. But unfortunately, that happens so often that people get into calorie deficits, and then sometimes they pair that with excessive amount of exercise, which just speeds up the decay of their body. And they end up, losing some weight for sure, but they feel like crap, they look like crap, and they just kind of took 5 years off their body with some mad, crazy 5-month or 5-week diet. So, we want to maintain protein, make sure that protein is prioritized. And when we're in a deficit, if we're in an energy deficit, which is what we want, so a deficit in carbs and fats, we want to make sure that the protein is not only controlled, but it can be beneficial to still be in a protein surplus because that allows you to actually build muscle. They've shown that you can build muscle while losing body fat, while being in a calorie deficit. There's a lot of nuances to it, but it can definitely be done. And it's extremely helpful, extremely important, because often when people want to lose body fat, they want to look better. If you lose an equivalent amount in regards to aesthetics and how you look, if you lose an equivalent amount of muscle to fat, and you just go from the same body composition at, X weight, and now all of a sudden you're 20, 30 pounds lighter, but you're the same composition, the same relative muscle mass to tissue, like fat tissue, fat mass, you're going to look the same. It bothers me that I said tissue for fat. So that's what I'm getting over. Muscle tissue and then fat, like stored body fat, are not the same thing. It's not actually tissue. So I'm mad at myself for saying that. I wanted to bring that up before I kind of thought that in the background as I continued to talk. So body fat and muscle, if we have a ratio of the two. When we lose fat or when we lose weight, the goal would be is that the fat goes away and we can see our muscles more, that we have a better aesthetic outcome. That only happens if we have sufficient protein during that deficit. If you don't pay attention to protein, you don't prioritize protein, then you will not look better as you weigh less. You will look the exact same as you weigh less, which is not what you want. Then also, by being able to maintain muscle tissue, and hopefully you can actually build muscle as you lose body fat, you're actually increasing your metabolism, which is the resting caloric usage. So how many calories you use just existing. You can actually increase that if you're able to lose body fat while building muscle tissue. And then that makes sustaining a lower body fat percentage, a lower body fat amount, easier long term. So when people say they want to lose weight, what they really mean is they want to lose fat. What that really means is they want to aesthetically look better. Now, people will often do it as well to improve blood markers. Blood markers will improve as body composition improves as well. So why not try to look better and get better blood markers? But that's important. How do we do that? Is we have to maintain sufficient protein. So we want to have a reduction in carbs and fats as our caloric deficit. We don't want the deficit to come from protein calories. We want it to come from carb and fat calories. So we want to maintain and actually prioritize protein intake. 3 tips that'll help us to meeting our protein requirements when we're in a caloric deficit. Number 1 is to get ahead of the day, meaning we want to eat a protein-rich first meal of the day. Unfortunately, I'll see clients do the complete opposite of this. Like the other day, I was checking a client's food journal, and for my clients, we do an online document. It's a Google Doc, and we title it My Journal. So it'll be the client's name in My Journal. So mine would be Rob, My Journal. Then I would look into their nutrition tracking app if they're using an app. I would sign into their profile, look through their days, see what they're eating, different meals, and give advice per meal per day. Now, unfortunately, sometimes people will have, I had, breakfast was a kashi cereal with almond milk. And I'm okay, there was 11 grams of protein in your breakfast. And you're only going to have a lunch and a dinner, maybe a snack, and somehow we're supposed to get to 120 grams of protein, or even 100 grams of protein, and you only had 11 at breakfast? Not good. So we want to increase the amount of protein in our day, specifically at breakfast. The more protein, the better. If you want to have a number to aim for, I would say of your daily total intake, try to have 25-ish percent, 25 to 33% of your daily protein in breakfast or in the first 2 meals a day, which if you have a mid-morning meal. So my clients, I have them break their days down into 6-hour chunks. So typically we're awake we'll sleep for 6 to 8 hours. We're awake for 16 to 18 hours. If we divide that by 6, that gives us the first 6 hours of the day is the first 1/3 of the day. Then we have the middle 6 hours of the day, which is the middle 1/3 of the day. Then we have the final 6-ish hours of the day, which is the final 1/3 of the day. In the first third of the day, we have a third of our calories in protein. In the middle third of our day, we have a middle amount of our third of our calories in protein. In the final third of the day, we have a third of our calories in protein. So that's how I would break it up. Typically, in the first 6 hours of the day, we will have just a breakfast, or we will have a breakfast and a small snack in the mid-morning. That means that we want to have a third of our total daily protein goal in breakfast or breakfast and that little mini meal. So that gives you an idea of how much protein should be in breakfast. It's going to sound like a lot if you're not used to that. Yes. Is it possible? Absolutely, millions of people do it. But is it challenging? Yes. So it's possible? Yes. Is it challenging? Yes. Is it doable? Yes. So I would encourage you to work on that, is to try to focus on protein-rich foods and try to get your protein up in the first meal of the day or the first 2 meals of the day. First, basically 6 hours of the day. Try to make sure you have at least a third of your protein in the first 6 hours of the day, and that way you don't fall behind, because it's very hard to make up protein later in the day. Second tip for maintaining protein requirements is to plan meals protein first. I was talking with a client about this recently, so I'll give you a little advice as to what I wrote for them. So in their meal, I said, as for food choices, I would think per 6 hour time block. So we talked about that, what that is. What can I eat that'll provide, and this client's third goal would be 50 grams of protein. So what can I eat that'll provide 50 grams of protein in the next 6 hours? And this could be in one meal, or it can be divided across 2 meals. So maybe like a large meal like a breakfast, and then a small meal like a snack. Or midday, maybe you have a lunch and then an afternoon snack. Dinner, you have dinner. Typically people eat larger portions at dinner, so that might take care of it on its own. But that is the first question I would ask, is what can I eat that'll provide the amount of protein I need? What is available to me? What can I make available to me? What can I prepare that'll provide the protein that I need in this meal? Once protein is accounted for, how many calories are left in the meal? So if it's supposed to be a 500 calorie meal, I have 50 grams of protein, that's 200 calories from protein. I now have 300 calories I need to make up in carbs and fats. So then I would ask, what can I eat that matches well with the protein food that'll provide that many calories? So if I'm having chicken and rice sounds good, right? If I want to have chicken and then I'm like, well, fats, I can get healthy fats from oil. Maybe I'll have, 6 tablespoons of oil in chicken. That sounds disgusting. So you want to pair the foods complementary, but that's kind of the process we go through. And then I shared with him a podcast titled What Makes a Good Meal Good? And that's podcast 1537 if you want to check that out. If the podcast player you're on doesn't go that far back in podcasts, you can go to our website, www.brittleironGym.com. Scroll down on the homepage. There's a podcast player that goes back 300 episodes. And then we have instructions underneath that on how to find even older episodes. But that podcast number, let me get back to it because I clicked away from it, was 1537, Nutrition, What Makes a Good Meal Good. And that'll help you put together a good meal. But this is what I would do per meal of the day to make sure I'm prioritizing protein, is what can I eat that'll provide the protein I need? How many calories does that account for out of how many calories I have to eat? And then of the remaining calories, should I have carbs? Should I have fats? Like what am I in the mood for? If I'm up and active and doing busy things, I probably want to have carbs because they digest faster. If I'm sitting in my butt doing nothing, I want to have fats because they digest slower. You don't have to be exclusive one versus the other. It can be a mix, but you can lean that mix in one direction or the other. But that's essentially how we just put together a meal, is making sure we put together a meal protein first. Then the third tip for maintaining protein requirements is to check in during the day. Know where you are at before you go to bed. So often when I look at people's journals, they'll have a really low protein dinner, and then they're low in their protein requirement for the day. So maybe their goal is 120 grams, they end up with only 95, but at dinner they only had 12 grams of protein. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why did we do that? And maybe they even had a protein item. Maybe they had like a meat in there and they only had like 3 ounces. And I'm like, oh, what the heck? If you'd have bumped that up to 6, you would have hit your target. The reason why is they didn't know. They didn't know until the end of the day or the next day. They enter the foods for the day before, and they're like, "Oh, holy crap! I was below. I missed my mark." Well, don't do it after. Like, you don't study after a test, right? I don't take a test and then study. I'm not going to eat my food a whole day and then find out what the hell I did. That's, ass backwards. That's the wrong order. You want to be tracking what you're doing while you're doing it, so that way you know where you're at, so you can end the day correctly. I track my foods as I go throughout the day. That can seem like a huge pain in the butt. I know that. But I don't use a nutrition tracking app. I have in the past. I've used it for, I started tracking calories when I was 16 years old. I bought this little book because, yes, the internet didn't exist in the way that I would have needed it back then. So I bought a book that had calories and nutrition facts for all common foods. It was, I think, like maybe 4 inches by 3 inches, but then like 2 inches thick. It was like a cube, basically. And I would flip through that and track it. Then when nutrition tracking apps became popular, I used those. I used every one you can think of. And now what I do is I know the meals that I typically have throughout the day. And then I'll just say, okay, if I have my shake that I normally have, it's 500 calories or 65 grams of protein. If I have tuna and rice, the amounts that I normally have, maybe that ends up being 800 calories and 70 grams of protein. I know my numbers, and I have them listed in my phone. And then if I eat a meal that's on my list, I just enter that into my little tracker app. For me, I just use actually the notes function on my phone. So it's the most basic way of doing it possible, probably. But I'm like, okay, this meal is around 800 calories. Maybe it was 764. Who cares? Close enough. 821. Fine. Close enough. 800. So I round it a bit. I typically will round to the 25 mark. So it would be, 700, 725, 750, 775, 800. So I round to a 25 mark. And then for protein, I round to a 5. So it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So if it was 17, I just mark it as 15. If it was 21, I mark it as 20. But I'll track my numbers throughout the day as I go through that. And that allows me to know where I'm at during the day. And then before the end of the day, I'm like, oh, okay, what do I need for dinner? Chicken and rice. Or actually, I'm kind of ahead of the day. Maybe I'll just do a shake because I'm not really that hungry anyhow. I don't want to force the chicken and rice if I don't need it, right? But for me, since I'm trying to maintain a heavy body weight, right now I weigh 290 pounds, I typically don't feel hungry enough. So I'll get to the end of the day and I'm like, crap, I'm not really hungry, but I'm supposed to have this meal, so I'll make sure I eat it. And then usually by the time I cook and I start eating it, I'll finish it. So it's not the end of the world. It's just my body would have preferred to not have to put work in. So what I end up having to give it is a little bit of work, which helps me build muscle and, grow and repair and all the good stuff. But my body would rather not do any of that because then it doesn't have to do anything. So I can't trust my natural hunger level. I do have to have a little bit of a guide to ensure that I'm doing the right things, not necessarily what I want to do in each moment. But those are 3 tips to meeting protein requirements. Get ahead of the day, plan meals, protein first, and check in during the day. Know where you're at before you go to bed, so that way you don't go to bed and then find out the next day you missed the whole damn day. That's discouraging. I would feel like crap. So now we want to get into tips for decreasing calories comfortably. I've done many weight loss and fat loss diets over the years, which sounds odd given I'm 290, but it's been a long road. I graduated high school at 165 pounds and skinny fat. I now weigh 290 and I have a lower body fat percentage than I had at 165. So it's been a long journey of ups and downs. Now some of them were intentional, some of them were not. But often when I would push to gain muscle, you would gain some fat along the way. I would then have to diet the fat back off, and that would be my dieting phases. So even though I've gained 125 pounds since then, I've had some dieting phases along the way, and I also experimented a lot when I was in different stages of my life because I wanted to learn all of these different components that I get to teach in the podcast. So I have done 3 diets where I lost 50 pounds in 10 weeks or less. I did one diet where I lost 50 pounds in 8 weeks. So that's pretty good. I was pretty happy with those. I've also lost 70 pounds over 10 months. I could have done that faster, but it was an experiment where I was trying a high protein diet. I was trying to have 2 grams per pound of body weight in protein, and then minimizing my carbs and fats from there to still be in a total calorie deficit. It was horrendous. But I did it. It was a good experiment. So I've done a lot of diets where I've lost weight. And I've lost weight in a more comfortable, controlled way as well. But those were more the extremes. Some of the diets were more comfortable than others, and some of them were intentionally uncomfortable. So the ones that were uncomfortable weren't long-term goals. So when I lost 50 pounds in 8 weeks, I didn't want to lose the 50 pounds and keep the 50 pounds off. I actually wanted to see if I could just do it. It was a challenge between a friend. They had mentioned whether or not that could be done, and I was like, hell yeah. So I was like, I'll see if it can be done. I just wanted to see for myself. So I was happy to see that I could do it. So I did it the first time and did it in 10 weeks. Then I was like, I wonder if I could do it in 8. So I did it a second time and ended up getting it done in 8. So it was fun to have those experiments, but those experiments weren't intended to be long-term goals. So I didn't use sustainable habits, meaning they weren't comfortable. I ate the same meal every day, all day. It was ground turkey and brown rice. I was allowed to put a little bit of marinara sauce, which I had a little measuring cup. I forget the exact amount, but it was a small amount. Just enough for a little bit of moisture in the food. But that is what I had. Breakfast, noon, and night. And from there, I could have sugar-free diet soda, which I drank to in a ridiculous amount, in an amount that felt ridiculously uncomfortable, and definitely digestive problems, a lot of bloating. But that was the experiment. Was I had to make sure my food wasn't palatable. I couldn't like it, because then I'd want to eat more of it. So I purposely chose foods I didn't like the taste of. And then anything I had to put in my face to help kind of get rid of the hunger pains was diet-free soda. If you try to drink a 2 liter of soda in an hour, you're going to be bloated. You're going to feel uncomfortable. But at least you didn't feel hungry. So I had to change the pain I was in order to be able to push through to keep going. And that was starvation for sure. I expected starvation, and I did not try to correct or address starvation. That was uncomfortable, but it was on purpose because it was unsustainable. It was not intended to be long-term. If you want to have long-term results, if you want to sustain the weight that is lost, you have to do it in a more comfortable way. So that way you can be consistent with the habits, and you can build a lifestyle of reduced calories that can be maintained long-term. So let's go through. I have 6 tips on how to decrease calories comfortably. Number 1 is to decrease calories in stages. Do not do a major, huge reduction right away. Number 1, that will cause crashes and cravings. You will feel miserable. You will have low energy. You will want to eat everything. You will hate everyone around you. You may already, but it'll get worse, I promise. So it'll be a very unenjoyable process for you and those around you. Then also, your body will, if you have a big, huge caloric reduction, your body will automatically start to fight the fat loss process. It'll only get harder from there. So instead, we want to reduce calories by reducing, maybe 100 to 200 calories on an average, like a daily average, for 1 or 2 weeks. I actually like people to do it for 2 weeks as a lower end. Sometimes we'll do it for 4 weeks. But for 2 weeks, I'll reduce 200 calories. Just see how that goes. So maybe I'm eating 2,000 calories. I'm going to go to 1,800 for 2 weeks. Maybe I was eating 1,800. I'm going to go to 1,600. So the idea is I just do a small reduction, 200 calories. That's not small in the sense that it's not productive, and it's not small in the sense that you won't feel it. But it's small compared to what people typically do. So 200 calorie reduction every 2 weeks. Kind of do it in stages like that. Number 2 is to use non-calorie substitutes. So don't drink your calories. Try to use calorie-free liquids. One of my favorite things is Nutricost Essential Amino Acids. It's a powder that just has some EAAs in it. I like the flavor, the fruit punch flavor. I like it better than all the other sugar-free crap things I've tried in the past to try to make water palatable because I don't like the taste of water, but to avoid calories. My wife is using the NutriCost Electrolytes mix, and that she says she loves it. It's a green apple flavor. So there are some good products out there. NutriCost I really like. It's good ingredients and it's relatively cheap. That's pretty cool. Good combination there. So you don't want to drink your calories. Try to use no-calorie drinks. Try to use no-calorie sauces. Try to get really low in sauce. Or make a rule for yourself is, okay, whatever sauce I use for a meal can't be over 50 calories in total. So figure that out. Find some low-calorie sauces. You can find low-calorie flavorings. Mrs. Dash, I have kept that company in business over many diets. So I'll use their different flavorings for meals to try to make the meal taste good, but to not add calories to it. One of the things you want to be careful, though, when you're using calorically reduced items like that is sugar alcohols. Some people digest sugar alcohols better than others. I am not one of those people. For me, if I have 6 grams of sugar alcohol in one thing, like a protein bar, my belly will hate me, absolutely hate me. So I have to avoid sugar alcohols completely. Maybe 1 or 2 grams ain't gonna hurt, but I can't really go above that. So I've had to be very careful in the sauces and things I use to make sure it doesn't include sugar alcohol. So if you go to a low-calorie or no-calorie sauce or drink or flavoring, and you're like, oh, this always messes up my stomach, check and see if it has sugar alcohols. If so, try to avoid the ones that have sugar alcohols. Then, number 3 is to use low calorically dense fillers. So this would be in a meal, maybe I've had enough of my meat and my carb source, but I'm still that's such a small amount. I know I'm going to still be hungry. Throw in vegetables that are low in calories. So that way you can fill up the volume of the meal, but not have a lot of calories to the meal. And that would be things like cucumbers, broccoli, carrots. There's about 4 million other things out there. So you have to look up the nutrition facts. I had a client one time that was eating a cup of lima beans, which is like 300 calories. So you have to be careful on which vegetable you choose. Some of them are lower calorie than others. But adding things to your meal that make you feel full, even though it doesn't add a lot of calories, is very helpful. With that one, you have to be careful of fiber. Sometimes when you add in a lot of vegetables, you're going to add increased fiber, and that can mess up digestion. So try to pick foods that are less fibrous, and that'll help. I know one of my clients, they have chicken and a chickpea pasta, which is a nice high protein meal, and then they dice up those little cherry tomatoes and cucumber, and sometimes I think they put squash, but I forget if they do squash. I know it's cucumber and tomatoes, and they'll chop that up, add that to it, and it adds a good volume to the meal, but it doesn't even add 100 calories in total. It's pretty good volume filler. So that would be another option. Tip number 4 is to plan activities at down times. The quote that I remember when I'm dieting is, idle hands are the devil's playground. Don't be idle. So I try not to be idle. I try not to sit around and do nothing. Because once you're doing nothing, you're going to think about food. So really try to be active. Go for a walk. Talk to a friend. Learn a hobby. Do something that keeps your mind engaged. So if you have a period of the day that seems to have a little bit of a lull, and you typically fill that lull with food, try to fill it with something else. That can be right after work. Maybe if you get home from work, you're a little stressed. Dinner isn't until 6:30, but you're kind of hungry now, so you start to snack and peck at things around the house. So instead, go for a walk, call a friend, learn the guitar, paint, take pictures of things, whatever the heck it is. Just go do something with that time. If your brain is busy, you'll be focusing on that rather than food. So that is a big thing. So remember the quote, idle hands are the devil's playground. So you don't want to be idle. You don't want to play with the devil. So try to stay busy. Number 5. This one, I can see this one being controversial. And in the podcast 2006, I actually gave one that's controversial as well. There will be people who will disagree with what I'm about to say. I understand, but I'm going to say it anyhow because it did help me. So, when do you have your first meal? Ooh. For me, naturally, I only eat once a day. When I was younger, I would eat once a day. It was usually late afternoon, maybe early evening, and I was fine. That would have been okay for me. I could have cared less about food. That's my natural state. That was very frustrating to overcome in order to kind of grow because I have to eat 5-6 times a day. Not that I quote unquote have to. I could eat one insanely large meal a day. I just don't like doing that. I don't like it for many reasons. But I eat multiple times a day now. So when I'm dieting, if my natural instinct is I can wake up and I can be active and do things for 4, 6, 8 hours before I would even really care about food, I will sometimes use that to my advantage. In the diets where the main goal was weight loss, meaning I'm trying to lose 50 pounds immediately, I would actually wait to eat. So I would wake up, I would start being active, go do things, and I would wait to eat. The downside to this is you will lose muscle tissue more and or hinder any muscle growth. It is not ideal for muscle maintenance and muscle growth to do that because you're basically going through your day fasted. That is a recipe for muscle catabolization, basically like your muscle getting eaten up. And it slows down recovery, repair, slows down growth. It's not great. Does it help weight come off faster? Yes, it does. Is it better for quality of what's happening? Hell no. So I am not a big proponent of my clients doing that. But I've done it before and it helped me get through extreme diets. So I could, give or take. If you have a mixed goal where you do want to lose fat, but you really, really, really want to maintain your muscle tissue and you're actually hoping to maybe grow muscle, then you got to eat protein immediately. Have protein immediately, carbs and fats later. And that could be through a protein like a casein shake, which is the slower digesting protein. Maybe you're going to have a meat or just something that's a little bit of like a more sustainable, slower digesting. Like if you have whey protein, which is a very fast digesting protein, that's going to be processed in 20, 40 minutes, and then all of a sudden you're back to having nothing in your system. So it is better to have a whole food protein that's digests slower. One of the things I've done in the diet in the past is I would wake up and eat a cup of cottage cheese. Now, if you're not a cottage cheese fan, you probably just threw up in your mouth. But I don't mind cottage cheese. So I would eat that in the morning when I would wake up. I would get like a cup of cottage cheese, literally, a cup of cottage cheese, and I would eat that as I would, sit on the computer and do things or go around the house do things, or I'd just woof it down my face and run out the door. The other thing is you could do, just try to get protein. Basically, you get protein as fast as you can, but minimize the carbs and fats because you want to minimize the energy nutrients, and that can help you be in an energy deficit. So you're quote-unquote fasted for energy, but you don't want to be fasted for protein. So that's something to play with is when do you have your first meal. I'm going to combine that with the next tip, the last tip, is have a high protein before bed. So what I would like to do when I'm trying to lose fat but maintain my muscle is have a lot of protein before bed. Have protein right when I wake up, but I delay my carbs and fats till later in the day. That, for me, I tend to have good energy, good mental focus. I see weight, like my weight come down, I see fat come off, but my muscle stays. So I feel best when I do it this way. So high protein before bed is our sixth tip, is having something high in protein before you go to bed. It helps with body repair and maintenance, so that way your body isn't decaying inside and you don't have, oh man, my elbow kind of hurts, my knee kind of hurts. What's going on? My body kind of feels like crap since I started this diet. Well, you want to make sure you have enough protein and have the protein specifically right before you go to bed so your body can do all those repairs while you're sleeping. So I'll have high protein before bed. What is high protein? It basically means when I divide my day up into the thirds, I have a third of my protein in the beginning of the day, third of my protein in the middle of the day, third of my protein at the end of the day. I have that third of the protein at the end of the day closer to when I go to bed. So maybe I'm awake, I'm just making up numbers. So for a reference and for a concept is, say my third of the day at the end of the day is from 6 p.m. to midnight. Well, rather than having all my protein at 6 p.m., and then by midnight, by the time I go to bed, the protein's pretty much already processing and almost gone, I will instead wait and have that protein closer to when I go to bed. So maybe I'll have it at 9 or 10. So I'll have my last meal maybe 2 hours before I go to bed rather than 4, 5, or 6 hours before I go to bed. That kind of thing. So I'll have a high protein item and a slow digesting protein. So I want, for example, like steak compared to white fish. So I want something that's going to take a long time to process and break down. I want very slow digesting protein. I'm going to have that closer to bed. That means throughout the night, my body has protein. Then when I wake up in the morning, I'll have a protein item, so that way my body has protein right away. And then I have my carbs and fats later in the day. And I find that has absolutely worked best for me. Some of my clients, it's a little too nuanced. They're not going to make sure that happens on a regular basis, so we don't get into those details. But if you're somebody who can actually manage and maintain your food and kind of plan that out, that is a really helpful and really good structure. So those are the tips for how to decrease calories comfortably. Is decrease calories in stages. Non-calorie substitutes, make sure you use those. Low calorie density fillers, so adding like vegetables and things to your meals so you feel fuller at your meals but it doesn't have a lot of calories. Plan activities at downtimes. Remember, idle hands are the devil's playground. Don't be idle. And then when you have your first meal, you can eat protein first but delay the carbs and fats. And then have a high protein and slow digesting protein before you go to bed. Those will all help. Awesome. If you need any help, if you want anything, just go to our website, www.brutalirongym.com. Tons of free information on the website, but also you can check out our services if you want to work together to get something set up, and then we learn it, and then you go on your own. I would happily help. I don't have any contracts with any of my clients, so we just work however long you feel it's useful. And I've been lucky. I've had clients for well over 10 years now. So I'm glad I'm always feeling useful. But the idea of the no contracts is I do have people for nutrition often. They want me to help them set something up. We go for 2 or 3 months. They think they have a pretty good idea of how to do it, and then they go on their own from there. That's very normal with nutrition coaching. So I don't want to lock people into long-term things that they don't need. You don't need to be paying me for a year. If I haven't taught you what you need to know within 2 or 3 months, I didn't do my job. But all of those services, all the things we have, you can check out on the website. Okay. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on the website. And if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.